Welcome to Braveheart. I hope today's story will make you think. It will be short but intense. Let's get to it. Dr. Jada Reynolds had just settled into her first-class seat on a flight from New York to Miami. It was a rare moment of relaxation for the 36-year-old, one of the youngest and most respected trauma surgeons at New York Presbyterian Hospital. Her dark skin gleamed under the soft cabin lights as she tucked her bag under the seat and adjusted her crisp white blouse. For the first time in months, she felt the weight of her work start to lift, if only for a brief time. Jada's journey to the top hadn't been easy. Growing up in a modest neighborhood in Harlem, the daughter of a school teacher and a nurse, Jada had always known she would need to work twice as hard to succeed. Through sleepless nights and tireless determination, she earned a scholarship to Stanford and later graduated from Harvard Medical School. But being a black woman in a field dominated by white men had its challenges. Microaggressions, doubts, and outright prejudice had been constant companions. Yet Jada let her skills speak louder than the skepticism, carving out a reputation as an expert in trauma surgery. Now, she was finally on her way to a much-needed vacation in Miami. Her colleagues had practically forced her onto the plane, insisting that she take a break. She'd left behind an overwhelming schedule of surgeries and patients, but she couldn't quite shake the guilt that clung to her. Her fingers traced the stethoscope she always carried, a small reminder of the lives she touched daily. But little did she know, this flight would test her resolve in a way she never anticipated. As the last passengers boarded, Jada noticed the curious glances. A young black woman in first class? That still seemed to surprise people. She met their gazes with a calm, confident smile, though she could feel the judgment in the air. She was used to this. However, what she wasn't expecting was the challenge that was about to sit right next to her. A man, probably in his mid-50s, dressed in an expensive but ill-fitting suit, was struggling to shove an oversized carry-on into the overhead compartment. He huffed in frustration, his face turning red as he grumbled under his breath. Jada, watching him struggle, leaned forward. "Excuse me, would you like some help with that?" she asked kindly, offering her assistance. The man barely glanced at her. "No, I've got it," he snapped, continuing his battle with the suitcase. She winced as the bag teetered dangerously, just as a flight attendant appeared by his side. "Sir, I'm afraid that bag is too large for the overhead compartment. We'll need to check it," she said. The man turned, his face flushed with irritation. "Are you serious? I've flown first class for years, and I've never had an issue with this bag." "I understand," the flight attendant replied calmly, "but we must follow regulations for everyone's safety." With a grumble, the man finally handed over the bag. He dropped heavily into the seat next to Jada, his frame spilling over the armrest. "First class isn't what it used to be," he muttered loudly, clearly wanting her to hear. Jada offered him a polite smile. "It can be frustrating, but I'm sure they're just following safety protocols." The man turned to her, really noticing her for the first time. His eyes narrowed, and his lip curled slightly. "Right," he said with a sarcastic edge. "And what would you know about safety? You some kind of expert?" Jada felt the familiar tightness in her chest, a warning that this was about to turn ugly. "Actually, I'm a trauma surgeon," she said, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Dr. Jada Reynolds." For a moment, the man seemed taken aback. "Well then," he said slowly, as if testing the waters. "Travis Whitmore," he finally offered, extending a hand reluctantly. "CEO of Whitmore Construction." The plane had started its taxi to the runway, and Jada hoped the awkward encounter would end there, but it didn't. "So, a surgeon, huh?" Travis said, his tone laced with skepticism. "What kind of surgeries do you do?" "Trauma," Jada replied, keeping her tone polite but firm. "I work with emergencies, car crashes, gunshot wounds, that sort of thing." Travis raised an eyebrow. "Impressive, for someone your age." Jada felt her jaw clench. She'd heard that tone before, the thinly veiled surprise that someone like her could have such a prestigious career. "I've been practicing for nearly a decade now," she said, her voice controlled. "I completed my residency at New York Presbyterian." The conversation was quickly becoming exhausting. "Must be nice," Travis said. "A vacation in Miami. I remember when I was starting out, I could barely afford a weekend at the beach." Jada bit back her response. "I've saved for this trip," she said evenly. It's important to take care of yourself in a high-stress profession. Self-care, Travis snorted. That's what they're calling it these days. Jada's patience was wearing thin, but before she could respond, a loud commotion at the front of the cabin caught her attention. A man, seated near the front, was slumped over, clutching his chest, gasping for air. Without hesitation, Jada unbuckled her seatbelt and stood. "Excuse me," she said, brushing past Travis, who looked startled by her sudden movement. "I'm a doctor," Jada called to the flight attendants as she rushed down the aisle. "Let me help." The man's face was pale, and beads of sweat dotted his forehead. "Chest pain," he gasped, clutching at his heart. "Can't breathe?" Jada assessed him quickly, her trained eyes picking up the telltale signs of a heart attack. "I need the first aid kit," she told the flight attendants calmly. "And if there's aspirin, nitroglycerin, anything for cardiac arrest." Passengers watched in awe as Jada took control of the situation. The cabin, which had been filled with murmurs of panic, now fell silent as she worked. A nurse from a nearby seat came forward to assist her, and together they stabilized the man's condition. As Jada worked, she caught a glimpse of Travis out of the corner of her eye. His face was a mixture of shock and what looked like regret. When the man was finally stabilized and breathing easier, a round of applause broke out in the cabin. Jada returned to her seat, her heart still racing from the adrenaline of the emergency. Travis shifted uncomfortably beside her. "Dr. Reynolds," he began awkwardly. I didn't think." Jada met his eyes with a calm that belied the storm of emotions inside her. "Maybe next time," she said coolly. "You'll think twice before making assumptions." For the rest of the flight, Travis was uncharacteristically silent. When they landed in Miami, he cleared his throat again. "Dr. Reynolds, I owe you an apology," he said, his voice quieter now. "I was wrong to judge you, and I'm sorry." Jada paused for a moment, considering his words. "It's not just about an apology, Mr. Whitmore," she said. "It's about understanding why you made those assumptions in the first place." He nodded, a flicker of shame passing over his face. "You're right," he admitted softly. "I have a lot to think about." Jada offered him a small nod. "I hope you do." As she stepped off the plane into the humid Miami air, Jada felt lighter. The confrontation had been draining, but she knew she had planted a seed of change, not just in Travis, but in everyone who had witnessed the events on that flight. And in the end, that was all she needed. If you don't like injustice, subscribe to the channel immediately. And if you really want equality, leave a comment confirming it. See you in the next story, which will be equally or more exciting than this one. You're always welcome.